Okay, YouTubers, here we go. This is a diagram that's showing everything. You could figure out your real wattage and amp hour draws off your battery bank. So this is a simple explanation. I have a 660 amp hour battery bank, right? So you take your battery bank, whatever yours is, 220, 660, whatever. So I have 12 deep cycle batteries. So my total amp hours is 660. So what you do is you divide that by 2, which equals 50%. So I have 330 amp hours. So the 330, you say, well, I have 660. You only get 50% out, so you have 330 amp hours. So then you take your 330 amp hours and you times it by whatever percentage. So I want to get to 80%, which is times 0.20. If you want to go to 70%, it'd be times 0.30. So you times it by 0.20, that's your 50%. Don't use that number, use your 50% number. And that's going to give me my amp hours at 80%. So I can draw 66 amp hours off my battery at night, and I'll still have 80% left. To figure out the wattage that I'm using, you take 66 amp hours from here, take your amp hours, you times that by your voltage. I'm running a 24 volt system, so 25.6 volts, that equals 1,689 watts. So I have this many watts to use overnight off my battery bank. And it's going to leave me at 80% depth charge because I'm only going to use 66 amps. Then you also got to factor in down here my inverter. My inverter draws 0.75 of a watt, so it's 20 watts running, right? So I'm running at 20 watts at night. You times your watts of your inverter times your hours is 240 watts. You got to add this number to that number to get your draw. So really, I only have 1,489 watts to use at night because I'm going to draw this number here off my inverter. So you don't just go off that number, you got to go off what your inverter is actually drawing to, because your inverter is going to be on. That's how you can figure that out. One of the most important things, that number, half. You don't have the whole number. What you do, what I was doing, what other people do, is they say, well, I have 666 amp hours, so I have this many. You don't have that. You only have half. So you got to do your draw with numbers at half of what that is. So if you have 660 amp hours, realistically, you have 330. That's why people want to go with a bigger battery bank. Next number here, let's take a look at this. So like here I was saying, I have a 24 volt battery bank, which is 12 batteries, which equals 660 amp hours. So 660 amp hours is equal to 16,896 watts. So this is what I was thinking. Oh, I got that, and I'm going to take my 20% off of that number. No, 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 no. You don't have that. You only have 50% until your battery's dead. 50% is 330 amp hours. So 8,448 watts. That's the number you have to work with. Not that. That's just a fictitious number because you only half of it. Your battery's dead. So you can never get the other half of that out of it. So when you're taking your battery down, you're not drawing off of this, you're drawing off of that. So that's where you take your battery, your amp hours, cut it in half, then do your math. So I have 8,448 watts. At dish rate charge, my state of charge. So I figured out if I want to have 80% left of my battery, only take a 20% drain, I could use 66 amp hours. There you go. If I want to go down to 75%, I can use 82 amp hours to get to that wattage. So if you go back and say, okay, I want to use 80%, and I might use that, well, my inverter is still drawing 240 watts, so it's going to get me closer to that. So I'm going to wind up between 75 and 80% at the end of the day, because instead of having 66, if you look down here, my power inverter draws 20 watts, 12 hours, 240 watts. There's 10 amp hour drain. So whatever I'm going to draw off here, I got to add 10 more amp hours to this number. So instead of 66, it'll be 76. And that puts me down somewhere in between there, like maybe 78%. So that's a quick explanation right here. So if I'm drawing 76 amp hours, 1600 watts I want to use, then I know that I'm going to come down to 76. So I added the 10 to that number. So realistically, 24.8. So that's the way you figure out the wattage. And this is 100%. I have my meters I check my meters. I can see what I'm drawing AC. I can see what I'm taking off the batteries. These numbers match exactly to what I'm taking off, to what I'm using. So if you want to calculate, go back to this calculation, freeze your frame, take your amp hours, divide it by 2, which equals 50%, so you only have 330 amp hours, not 660. You take your 330 amp hours, you times that by the percentage that you want to draw down. If you only want to draw down 10%, 0.10. That equals 90% of your batteries left, and that'll give you your amp hours. So 330 times whatever the percentage. 0.20 is 80, 90% is 0.10, 75, 0.15, and so on. And then that'll give you your amp hours. And when that gives you your amp hours, down here, you take your amp hours, times it by your voltage. If that's 12, then you're going to put down your 12 volts there. That's going to give you the watts, the usable watts that you could use. So now you know your number for your watts. Boom, that's what I got to use. Not that number's baloney. It's that number there. So you figure out, now you know exactly how many watts you can take down at night because you're not charging your battery. Then you take your inverter, you have to figure out how many watts your inverter is using, and you got to add that to this number. So you got to add your 240 watts that I'm using. That's just gone. That's just translation that inverter's on. So I got to add that to that. So now I'm at, 1920 watts, something like that, right? So that's what I'm going to use because you got to add that number to that number, and that's going to give you the real numbers, and you can figure out your percentages there. And that's how you figure out how your battery bank works, how everything happens. Very, very important. So there you go. If you want to freeze some of that there, this is and you can punch in whatever number you have. You can take your amp hours. If you have 220 amp hour battery bank, you put 220 there, then you do the math, boom, and you come out, so I only have 110 amp hours. You don't have 220, you only wind up with 110. And then you start doing your translations right here, and this is a simple formula, and that's going to give you your watts, and then you'll know exactly how much you can draw off your battery. Instead of saying, oh, I got 3,000 watts, like you look here and say, I have 3,600 watts before I get down to 20%. No, you don't. This is the number you have because you're really working with the 330 amp hours. You're not working with the total amp hours of your battery bank. Half of it doesn't work. So your battery goes dead. If I have 10,000 amp hours and I run 5,000 off my battery's dead. So 5,000 of it doesn't exist. That's the lowdown with the battery. Half. You don't get it. You add this number up and they say, oh, I got a 30,000 watt system. You don't. You only have a 15,000 watt system. So people exaggerate and say, oh, I got 30,000 watts out of my system. No, you only have 15. If you have 30,000 watts, it means you have 60,000 watts of storage. So follow these and you'll figure it out, and this will get you on the right track. Good luck.